I'm Michael Aronson of the Daily News, and welcome to CUNY Forum, a monthly town meeting that brings prominent New Yorkers together with CUNY faculty and students of the Edward T. Rogowsky Internship Program in Government and Public Affairs. When he was running for governor, Eliot Spitzer said, quote, "Everything changes day one. Soon it will be day 100, making it a good time to take stock." By Albany standards, it's been an interesting 3 months since he was sworn in on January 1st. Working with legislative leaders, Spitzer quickly concluded deals on two long-standing controversies: reform of the workers' compensation program and civil confinement for some sex offenders after they complete their prison terms. Yet those deals were done the old-fashioned Albany way, in secret. Likewise, a change to how government ethics are policed was also done in secret. Spitzer has publicly fought with the 212 lawmakers, notably on the struggle to appoint a new state controller. Yet among his biggest battles have been the budget. Spitzer proposed an increase in state funds of nearly 8% over last year, but the legislature wanted to add even more. The most contentious and high-profile has been his proposed changes in the state's Medicaid program, which has been vigorously opposed by the Hospital Workers Union, Local 1199, and their allies in the Republican State Senate. 1199 has been running a relentlessly anti-Spitzer TV ad campaign, which is definitely hurting his standing in the polls. So the question we want to address for the next hour is, how is he doing? With us are four people who probably have different answers. Peter Pope serves as Director of Policy for Governor Spitzer. Ken Sherrill is a professor of political science at CUNY's Hunter College. Errol Lewis is a columnist for the Daily News. And Dan Cantor is Executive Director of the Working Families Party. Peter, let's start with you. How is he doing?
Well, thanks, Michael. Thanks for having me. First, we don't really think of it in chunks of 100 days. We view it as what happens in the first session, even in the first year. So to some extent, it's an artificial construct, and others will judge us looking back on the first 100 days. But we think we've had a pretty good start, whether you measure it in terms of a session or a year or 100 days. We've done ethics reform, we've done budget reform, we've done workers' comp, we've done the civil commitment bill. But I think most of all, one of the things that we've done is we've brought a new energy and a new willingness to get things done. We have everybody at the table. We're having lots of negotiations. We have lots of controversy. We have lots of excitement. We give you guys an awful lot to write about. So we think we're doing a pretty good job so far.
Errol, has the fundamental way things work or don't work in Albany changed? Meaning the three men in the room on deals, whether it's the civil confinement or workers' comp or even the budget? Or is it really a new day? Is the dysfunction, is that over?
I think there's an interesting question that you're pointing to about whether or not a reform is really worthwhile if it's done in secret. So much of the complaining about Albany and when it was dubbed the most dysfunctional state legislature in the country had to do with the way bills are rushed through, the way there are really no meaningful committee hearings, the way everything is collapsed into one grand bargain where people are trading off things that have no business being traded. On the other hand, I think Spitzer has set a tone, and he's made clear that he's ready to walk out of that room at any time and take his case to the public, number one. And number two, that what goes on in that room has got to be something meaningful, and that you can split out particular issues, whether it's the appointment of the controller or the workers' comp bill or the budget, indeed, right now. And I think that he has changed the way that this has been done. I mean, I think the state Senate and the state Assembly, they always knew under Pataki that they could go 2-3 more weeks, that they could throw more trade bait behind those closed doors and make a different or a bigger kind of a deal. I think it's pretty clear now that that's not going to be the way it happens. It's not going to necessarily please a lot of the open government people, but I think there's an amount of efficiency that's coming out of Albany that will make a lot of reformers, probably myself included, look the other way, at least for now. Honeymoon's not over yet.
I mean, on the closed door.
Sure. I mean, I don't care if you close the door as long as when you come out you get something done. And let me mention a sort of a small ticket item that maybe a lot of people don't know about, which is within days of taking office, by executive order, he ended one of the most onerous, crushing policies that had hurt a lot of people for many, many years, which was the prison's telephone monopoly. You know, there was a system in New York where if you wanted to reach an inmate in a New York State prison, and there are 63,000 people behind bars, you had to take an overpriced collect phone call that was controlled through a monopoly contract with one company, which is MCI, now Verizon, and it was draining hundreds of millions of dollars, literally, out of the lowest income communities in the state. There's litigation around it. There were protests. It went on for years. Under Pataki, there was no progress. Within a couple of weeks, by executive order, they just ended it.
But there was no pushback against Spitzer on that.
Yeah, so do I care that there were no hearings? Do I care that there were no meetings? I do not care. The people who got relief, trust me, they do not care how it was done. What matters to them is that it did get done.
Well, the 3 men in a room trope was always a little bit overstated. I mean, things happen in legislatures. You don't bargain in public. People meet, they work. I always felt that was wildly overstated. And, if you're the leader of a legislative body, like Silver's a leader or Bruno's a leader, if you're not attentive to your members, you won't be the leader. So I always thought that was very much overstated. This idea that New York had the quote-unquote most dysfunctional legislature because the budget was late, even the governor himself has said it. The goal is not necessarily an on-time budget, it's a good budget. And the reason budgets were late for many, many years, one could argue, was because, actually I think this is quite true, progressives had power and they held up the budget, and that's what happened. Now we don't have to hold it up anymore because we got a governor who's trying to get certain things done. But under Pataki, under the great, this guy was so disinterested in actually being governor, you had to just kind of fold your arms and hold off until you could get a better budget. And that's what happened year after year after year. So I think we should resist that view.
That's what I wanted to ask Ken. I mean, you've seen lots of governors come and go. Not that many, but...
more than I'd like. Not as many as I'd like.
Is Spitzer a real reformer, or is he just an ambitious guy who wants to get things done, and he wants to be the third man in the room instead of George Pataki?
Well, he says he's a reformer, and I think he's put issues of real reform on the table. And I don't think those are issues that can be accomplished in 100 days, but in fact are going to take between 2 and 6 years to do, which is something that would bring real democracy to New York State, that would make public policy follow the outcome of elections, which would allow voters to make some serious judgments about the performance in office of their elected officials. Real reapportionment would be, I think, a most important single thing. And then there's the substantive achievements. If you were to look back, say, over the last 4 governors, Carey could do nothing but try to prevent the state from going bankrupt. Cuomo came into office and his agenda was basically to prevent things from getting worse. In the first few months of the Pataki regime, what you saw was the restoration of the death penalty, major budget cuts, and some tax cuts, and so, but no substantive reforms. This is the first administration, and I think it goes not just to the governor, but probably to the attorney general as well, who want to take on a rather corrupt process of doing business in Albany. And that's not an overnight agenda. You can't judge that in 100 days.
Well, we should rename the show.
Well, I'm sorry.
Yeah, I was joking. The fights that we've seen so far, Errol, have centered on Spitzer winning some, or Spitzer losing some with the state controller, and in an enormous struggle. I think the biggest one we've seen in politics in this year, in this state in years, the battle over Medicaid, which has been going on, all through the month of March just passed, and millions were spent against him on television, and it really hurt him in the polls. Is this a reform? Is this a better way to do government?
I think fighting over what matters is a much better way to do government. Compared with dealing away what really matters.
But in the end, they
trading it away around the edges.
In the end, they cut a deal in the dark.
Well, I don't know if I would call it a deal. I thought it was really a showdown over the controller. I don't know that there was any deal there. He just lost. But I think that's what Professor Sherrill is talking about. If policy is supposed to follow the outcome of an election, we elected a reformer in New York State. He had a clear mandate. Any way you pulled it, people wanted him to sort of go and do exactly what he did, which was to challenge the legislature to name the best person to be the chief investment officer for the pension fund and the chief fiscal officer for the state. And the fact that it devolved into this kind of political fight that he ended up not winning, I think is much less important than the fact that the fight actually happened. And that all by itself is progress. It would have been unthinkable in any of the last 3 administrations for a legislative prerogative like naming the controller to be tampered with in any significant way by the governor. But he went to the mat, he fought for it, he got the support of, I think, most, if not all, of the editorial boards around the state and the public at large. So I think we'll see more of that. Even if it's just a matter of isolating legislative backwardness so that the public can see it for what it is, I would call that a step in the direction of reform.
Well, did the Spitzer administration give in too much to the legislature? They revamped the ethics rules in Albany, and to have ethics be controlled by a new agency. But the legislature is going to be exempt from that. And the problems that we've been reading about in Albany for years of, member items or assemblymen or senators getting arrested, with other abuses, have all dealt with the legislature. And the new ethics regime, they're not part of it. And how are the people served by that?
There sure have been ethical violations that have gone past the legislature. One of the most prominent, of course, was Alan Hevesy, a statewide elected official. And that was done by the Ethics Commission, not the state legislative Ethics Commission. New Yorkers sent Eliot Spitzer to Albany to fight, and he has fought like the dickens in the last couple of months, and the controller issue was one of those. He's not afraid to say what he thinks. He's not afraid to say it loud. He's not afraid to say it in the home districts of the assembly people who disagree with him. But in the end, governing is the art of what is possible. And there's certain things that are possible and there are certain things that are not. And what we are trying to do is we are trying to fight as hard as we can over every principle that we think is important. And we're also trying to actually affect change. It doesn't do anybody any good if we stand up and we pound on the table and in the end we're not able to change policy. We are about change. He was about change for the 8 years when he was Attorney General. He's been about change for the last couple of months, and he's certainly going to be about change in the next few years.
Does the, as Peter said, Spitzer fights. And I think people understand that when he was Attorney General, he would fight. And he's been fighting these past few months in Albany. Is that a successful strategy in general? Do you just make enemies? Do you win battles?
I think there are always costs to getting into a fight with somebody who's as powerful as a governor. And in the long run, the governor has extraordinary resources. New York's governor constitutionally is one of the most powerful governors in the nation. And New York's legislature constitutionally is one of the weakest. In the long run, the governor is at a tremendous advantage in this. The only thing the legislature can do is refuse to pass a budget. That is the only thing the legislature can do. It can refuse to act. The way in which the legislature exercises power in New York is by not doing things, by bringing things to a halt.
To wait him out.
When things are brought to a halt, those who bring it to a halt are blamed by the public.
Yes, and that's what people don't understand about what happened under Pataki. It's why it's so interesting right now. We'll get to Spitzer in a moment,
gone.
Right? Well, but it's important to understand, right? The reason the budgets were late is because they wanted to tax rich people more. They wanted to spend more on poor people. They wanted to do a lot of things that Pataki never wanted to do. So the state assembly would just say, no, we're not going to pass the budget. And we're just going to wait and wait and wait. With Spitzer, he comes in, he actually wants to do stuff. I actually think, I'm not sure he was sent to Albany to be a reformer. I think he was sent to Albany to get things done on content. People care much more about health care than they do about lobbying reform. And they care much more about jobs upstate than they do about whether there are committee hearings. They care about the outcomes much more than they care about the process. And in that sense, one gives Spitzer high remarks and Brother Pope incredibly high remarks on this workers' comp deal. Now, we obviously, nobody gets everything right, and I don't think he's entirely right on his approach on the budget. But the budget as a whole has a lot of, very good things on the education, on economic development, and so on. There's a lot of, it's a big state, and it's a big government, and it's not going to be 100 days worth of work. It's going to be many years. There's enormous crises. But I don't think at the end of the day we're going to measure Spitzer based on whether or not we have a stronger process. It's going to be the outcomes. And I think that's the way it should be. That's what we're interested in.
But isn't it both? And isn't it the process of how it's done as well as the outcome?
I don't know. I think that workers' comp deals, if you're an injured worker...
That the ends and the means both matter?
Yeah, this is a myth, this idea that of course things are done in secret. You don't negotiate in public. You talk because you don't know what your final deal is, right? When you come out at the end, that's when you go public. It's wrong to think that important things are going to get negotiated in public. What the voters need to do, and what we have done this election, is elect a governor who's committed to a different approach to governing than the last regime or his Republican opponent. And it's his job.
So everything.
But
that,
Michael,
so everything that these students at CUNY and elsewhere are reading in their books and civics and history about how laws and are done in the democracy.
Well, here's the problem. I'd ask you,
You said hearings don't matter.
Well, in Congress we have great rules, right? And under Tom DeLay and Newt Gingrich, from my point of view, we got horrendous outcomes. We had good rules, but the balance of power was such that we got terrible outcomes. Maybe we could have slightly better rules, but the real question is, what's the balance of power? And now the balance of power has shifted. Now, I think we need to obviously remind no leader is perfect, and we're going to have to push and prod the governor just as we would anybody else.
But those outcomes were a consequence of an election. They weren't a consequence of a bill not having to go through committee before going to the floor.
But our bills did go through committee. I think, Michael, you overstate the secrecy in which this was done. There was the governor. There were representatives of labor. There were representatives of business. There were both houses of the legislature. Right. There were, and that was on a foundation of 10 years of hearings that came before. The bill was published. The bill went through the committees that it had to in both chambers, and then there was a public vote. This is, in fact, democracy. There was participation. It was done in public. There was sunshine. We adhered to all the rules. There was not what is called the message of necessity, which allows you to introduce a bill and vote, and nobody gets to see it. Didn't happen. In fact, the bill was published for longer than the law required before the Assembly voted on it.
Well, right now, we heard that the powers in Albany are discussing campaign finance changes. Should the donation limits come down? Shouldn't that be in public? Shouldn't Governor Spitzer, it's only been 100 days, shouldn't Governor Spitzer come out and say, here's my plan on campaign finance, and this is what I would like to do, and I would like to see the legislature go forward. Instead, what we'll likely see is the three leaders show up at a podium with a press conference and then say the bill is being introduced tomorrow, and then it passes unanimously.
Well, I'm not going to debate you about something that hasn't happened yet, but I'm happy to talk to you about the bills that we've done. And the bills that we did lived up to classically what you learn in civics class.
I think what a lot of this discussion gets to, I think, is the fact that there are important reforms that are really outside the governor's purview. I mean, the way those legislative bodies are run is, in fact, I think, a disgrace. I mean, no bill comes to the floor unless it's going to be voted yes. There's no other vote that takes place. It's either yes or it vanishes into committee. And that's true for even really important policy questions, really important bills. Or you get the farce of the one house bill.
But
right,
it's a parliament. Think of it as a parliamentary system. It's you have strong leaders.
There are limits to what strong leaders can do.
During this season,
unless you get to the Supreme Soviet.
We know that if you go up to Albany every week during the budget season, you have what's called the Tin Cup Brigade, where innocent, well-meaning civic and local leaders make the trek all the way up to Albany under the absolute falsehood, under the illusion that they're talking to legislators who have some ability to move something forward. And the reality is that they have almost no ability to do it. So they come up
a show.
And they kind of entertain these people, and then the minute they leave, and this is what happens almost every night in Albany, they go to fundraisers that are paid for by lobbyists who are, in fact, their true constituency. So there's something that's not just messy about that. It's not just confusing, but it's really, in a very deep sense, just wrong. You know, that there's people voting and giving their contributions and going up to talk to these people and believing that they have a representative in Albany, when in fact what they have is somebody who's there to sort of move along the agenda of lobbyists for the most part.
Well, Dan, in
It's
fact,
just wrong. I mean, I love Arrow, but I think this is so profoundly wrong. The reason good stuff didn't happen, the Assembly would pass it, and Bruno and the Republicans would stop it. And it happened time after time. You'd go up on mental health, you'd go up on minimum wage, you'd go up on school funding. Every time we'd move a good bill through some of these legislators who would listen to us, and then it would stop. It's not because something wrong with the system, it's because the wrong people had power. So now, what Spitzer has done, to his credit, he has scared the daylights out of the Senate Republicans, and they're starting to move a little bit, and they're starting to be a little bit more flexible. And now, this is a big fight. The governor's going to have to give too, because they're not without any power.
Dan, what did you think about empty seat voting? I mean, until recently, you could go in the morning, you could swipe your card in, and then you could leave for the rest of the day, and somebody else would cast all of your votes on whatever came up. And that was the way business was done in Albany. Now, that goes to me, it seems to me, that goes well beyond questions of efficiency or not wanting to do your business in public. To me, that's just handing over in a way that's immoral, if not illegal. I think, you're voted into office to do something. You swipe your card in the morning and go play golf for the rest of the day, and all of a sudden a bunch of votes have been cast in your name.
That would seem to be a bit much.
I had a member of the legislature say to me that this ending of empty seat voting was one of the worst things ever done, because now he has to waste his time on the floor, and he could have been in his office holding meetings, doing the important work of the legislature,
it's a big problem
meeting
for
with
people for grassroots lobbyists. It's actually true. You have much less access now because the legislators are on the floor, but that's probably where they're supposed to be.
They certainly weren't
only 24 hours in the day.
As somebody said, I mean, this is not the governor's responsibility of how the legislature behaves or misbehaves, but the governor has to work with these people, these 212 legislators. And in the controller battle, he said, no, this is wrong. I'm not going to support it. The person that you're selecting is totally and absolutely unqualified. And everyone knows they have to live together. But, how cozy and collegial should the governor be with a body which acts, as everyone knows, sometimes despicably?
Despicable is your word, not my word. And we are certainly, and the governor is certainly prepared to fight hard and tough, and he's shown that. And he's also shown that he's prepared to talk and to reason and to compromise to get good outcomes. So he's prepared to use every arrow in the quiver. He is completely prepared to fight on the streets to get the votes that you need to govern. He's prepared to criticize people. He went to members of his own party's districts and said that he disagreed with the way that they voted on the controller issue. And he's also then willing to put it to the side and do the work of the state. So I think you have to do it all, and he's prepared to.
The Spitzer's budget, he took a different approach this year. Generally, like with everything in Albany, they play a game. The governor proposes a budget, and one house adds more to it, and the other house adds even more, and they cut a deal in the middle. This year, Spitzer says, let's just start at the final point. My original budget proposal will be where we should end up. But the legislature didn't change. They just came in and said, okay, we're used to adding billions and billions. And was he naive in doing that? I mean, Ken?
No, governors always come in lower than anybody else because governors are held accountable if there's a shortfall. It's in the governor's interest.
But this year he came in higher. I mean,
the governor came in lower than either house of the legislature. The governor always comes in lower. Every governor always comes in lower because it is in the governor's interest not to overestimate revenues, because it's the governor who gets blamed if there are cuts at the end of the year. It's the governor who gets blamed if
No, that's not what I was... inflation is running at about 2 to 3%. And the governor proposed a budget that increased state spending by 8%.
Right.
And then the legislature just came and added even more on top.
In terms of the estimate of revenues, that's the key. I'm sorry. That the governor always comes in with the lowest revenue estimate. And, you know, what had been the case under Pataki was the Senate would come in a little bit higher and the Assembly would come in significantly higher. You know, you're seeing that role reversed as the opposition party always comes in with the highest estimate of revenues because it's in their political advantage to do that.
So, Dan, we end up with the conservative Senate Republicans wanting to spend the most money, and the Conservative Party of New York siding with the liberal Democratic governor, and your party taking the opposite.
Right. I mean, it's there's some shifting of roles here. You know, after this long drought of the Pataki years, a lot of pent-up demand. So Spitzer shows up and correctly says, "I am going to solve the CFE lawsuit. That's this campaign for fiscal equity,
the school funding for New York City schools,
precisely, and other high-needs districts." And he's taking this lawsuit was about New York City. He is correctly, I think, dealing with the high-needs districts around the state. So on that, he gets, you know, sort of an A+. From our point of view, the mistake, and we have expressed this to the governor, and he knows this is our view, and he definitely does not agree with us. He has forced a choice, a Hobson's choice between schools and health care that we think was a mistake. We live in a remarkably wealthy state, and the no new taxes pledge, a particularly high end that some of us think might have been called for to do away with the need to make this choice, is what we would have preferred, because inequality in New York is reaching all-time high, and we didn't need to make this decision between education and healthcare. We're wealthy enough to do, luckily we're wealthy enough to do both, and when you're 50 points up in the polls, you don't need to take a no new taxes pledge. Nevertheless, he did, and one thing about him, he is not changing his mind on something like that, at least in the short run. I think in the long run, inevitably he will, because he does reason, and he will come to realize we're going to need these resources if we're going to have the schools and healthcare we want.
Do you think, though, that no new taxes was a political pledge or a policy decision? I mean, he talked at length about how the state is losing families, especially young families upstate.
Yeah, we're
how
not
the
right.
upstate economy is just crumbling, and he tied that back. I mean, whether you agree with it or not, from early on, he tied that back to the fact that there was a high tax burden and that not enough was being invested in certain things that would make the economy
it's a really interesting question. I mean, this is a governor with a real brain, right? He has a theory about capitalism and democracy. He wrote this really interesting article a couple of years ago in the New Republic, I think. We haven't had a governor who actually thinks about how do you balance free market with the need to regulate the market and produce outcomes in which non-wealthy people will thrive. I think the no new taxes thing is mostly about politics, because no one was talking about higher taxes on middle class, working class, or poor. It was always a question of, do we let the very high end tax relief that Pataki and Bush gave to people who earn, let's say, more than 10 grand a week? And there's a lot of them in New York. There's like 44,000 households earning more than $10,000 a week. You know, it's a lot of rich people here.
I don't know how many on this platform.
Not this panel, and even the Daily News.
Let me. We have some students lining up for questions. Why don't we take our first question and just say what school you're with and ask your question.
My name is Boris Noble. I'm from Brooklyn College, and this question is more to Mr. Cantor. What would happen if New York's economy were to go down? Is this possible to continue spending on healthcare and education?
Well, this is it depends what you mean by down. You know, there is a business cycle. We haven't repealed that yet. I think every legislator.
Do you want to?
Not necessarily. In a recession, there's cutbacks inevitably, because by constitutional requirement, you have to balance the budget. And we all live in fear at some level of a Wall Street slowdown. Nevertheless, it's we live in the richest city in the history of the world, right? I mean,
well, you're right on that. I mean, the city is doing very well, and the city of New York provides the state with 50% of its revenue, depending on if you're including commuters or not. And does New York City get its equitable share? It doesn't get it from Washington. For years, it hasn't gotten it from Albany. And is this something, a political conundrum that the governor can solve? Let me try Ken and then Peter on it.
Depends on whether or not you believe in taxing the rich.
Yeah, he shouldn't solve it. Why should he solve that? I mean, it's one state, it's one society. We're either in it together or we're not. The fact that there's all these poor schleppers in Syracuse.
I'm saying that all this money is going up to.
Yeah, and it's coming from Wall Street. It's paying for things that help people in Buffalo and Syracuse and Rochester, as well as in New York. That's as it should be, I think, is what the professor is suggesting.
It's his class.
No, Dan is absolutely right. I mean there's a lot of wealth generated in New York City, and there's remarkably little wealth generated upstate New York, and a certain amount of redistribution becomes necessary to prevent dreadful impoverishment upstate. The question is, what's the most equitable formula? Certainly, the formula that shortchanges the New York City school system is not equitable.
I mean, for years, the wealthier, better off suburban school districts got more money.
That's right.
And the kids in the city schools, where there's higher poverty and greater need, we're getting shortchanged, and we've had court ruling after court ruling, and the money still hasn't shown up.
So I mean, it may be a mistake to think about sort of the aggregate. 50% of the money that comes from New York City, but less than 50% of the benefits come to New York City, and instead to say, with regard to education, there's this pattern of unfairness. With regard to economic development, there's a different pattern of fairness or unfairness. With regard to health care, there's a different pattern. I mean, it may just be a mistake to view it in gross terms like that.
Well, Peter, isn't the perception outside the city that New York City just is a drain on the state?
Well, I think that there are all kinds of perceptions, and one of the things that we find is that when you begin to look at actual statistics and actual facts, people tend to close their policy positions. I mean, for example, the issue of looking at New York City as one thing. Well, one of our philosophies is that there is one New York, and that when everybody properly understands their self-interest, we will all move forward together. But there is the New York that has Wall Street and pays a huge amount of the taxes. And then there is the New York where we have the schools that are dramatically underfunded. And one of the things that our budget does is it corrects that. It puts the money into those schools. It moves away from the kind of institutional politics that we're talking about earlier, where certain parts of the state just expected a certain percentage of the money. Well, that wasn't based on looking at facts. It wasn't based on looking at need. It was politics. So our budget takes that and says, how much does it cost to run a good school? How much can this part of the state afford to pay when you balance it out? And what's the difference? And that's the amount that school district ought to get. So what we're trying to do is we're trying to move away from this notion, whether it's in hospitals, whether it's in schools, what you got is what you're going to get again, and towards what do we need to get to the policies that work for New Yorkers.
I think we have another question from a student.
Anthony Anderson, John Jay College. Good evening. My question is more towards Mr. Cantor and Mr. Pope. What is the governor's position on public housing, and will that sector see any funding from the state, or will it be moving more towards the private end?
Okay.
The governor's position on public housing is that we don't have nearly enough. We don't have enough housing. We don't have enough low and middle income housing, and we've got to do a lot better. One of the things that he has proposed, and we're in the midst of doing it right now, is to take an inventory of all of the property that New York State owns right now. Because we're fairly confident that it's not being used to its fullest extent. The housing problem is enormously complicated, and one of the places that we believe that society feels it the most is people who are coming out of prison and trying to get back into the community. If you come out of prison and you have a physical health problem or a mental health problem or an addiction problem, and the first place you live after prison is a homeless shelter, why are we surprised that we have a high recidivism rate? So one of the things that we're trying to do is figure out, in solving that broader problem, where people are going to live. So the answer is absolutely we're going to pay a lot more attention to housing.
In a brotherly way, I want to challenge Peter.
The CUNY challenge.
My understanding is that the public housing line was cut about nearly $70 million. And now we have the Start City law, where we are desperate to get the governor's support. This would be the law, with Stuyvesant Town and now Start City.
Conversion.
We've reached a kind of a consciousness, a public awareness that no matter how much housing Mayor Bloomberg or Governor Spitzer is able to build, if we lose affordable units out the other side, we will never catch up. So the Start City bill, that will only pass if Governor Spitzer wants it to, would say that if you move these, if you convert these units, they go into rent stabilization. We're going to take away the right of the Mitchell-Lama landlord to leave the program and go market rate. Some would say, well, that's not fair. That wasn't the deal. And our view is the crisis is so enormous. I mean, either we're going to have a city that works for middle class and working class people, or we're not.
Harold,
and so that's a question I think is very much on people's minds.
Well, I think on that question, just as Dan said, I mean, this is a matter of changing the basic rules on one of the most successful housing programs of the last 30 years. I mean, Mitchell-Lama was a tremendous success. I've never understood quite why nobody wants to come up with a new Mitchell-Lama and just kind of, really just go back to the beginning, offer similar or perhaps enhanced incentives for developers to come into some new round of housing. Perhaps your inventory review might find, parcels where that's appropriate. I mean, but a lot of this stuff was done, in housing that was abandoned. In New York City, you find it much more difficult to find big tracts of land or of housing that's just not being used, just being underutilized. But I think not that far outside the city, you go into southern Westchester, you go into places like Portchester, you go certainly to some of the upstate towns that are not as far away as they used to be. Transportation has improved to a certain extent. I think you've got the basis for at least talking about it. And certainly in a place like Buffalo, you've got a lot of reasons to start talking about it. So we'll see what comes out.
I mean, a surplus of housing in Buffalo, or
well, you've got what you want. You've got land. Right. You've got relatively low cost.
But you don't have jobs
Well, but I think a lot of the talk by the administration about building up the infrastructure, it has to be one conversation. I mean, it's good to talk about housing, and in New York City, that's always a separate kind of conversation. Right. But everywhere else in the state, you've got to talk about the whole thing. Why is there so little demand? Where's the jobs base going to come from?
But there are a lot of CUNY students who live in Start City. I'm sure of it, right? There has to be. There's so many people that live there. And
I think we got some hands right here.
Yeah, right. Oh, really? So then you're very aware of what's going on there, and this is on people's minds, is whether or not they're going to preclude the conversion of these things to market rate by changing the law. And Assemblyman Lopez has a bill. It's up to the governor.
We could have a whole show on housing. Let's see what else we have from the students. No, I'm serious. I mean, it's a serious issue, I think it doesn't get enough attention. But we got people lined up. Let's give them a chance. Go ahead.
Hi, my name is Yana Sons from Brooklyn College as well. I wanted to bring back the issue of the public and the quote, "We don't negotiate with the public." I was kind of wondering. If that kind of attitude is gonna influence on on Governor Spitzer future policies and how it's gonna result.
All right, Peter, we're back to the closed door issue.
Well, I think we do negotiate with the public. I think that's what democracy is about. I think that the governor has gone out into people's districts to negotiate with legislatures in front of the public. You can't govern without votes. That's what democracy is about. We believe that the public gave us a direction. We believe that the public told us to go out and fight. We believe that the public told us to come back with results, and we've been trying our hardest to do that.
It's interesting to see, can Governor Spitzer take the fighting attorney general, which is what people loved about him, right? I mean, this guy just stuck it to, bad guys, and now become an executive, which is a different task. And so far, some good, some we hope will get better.
Ken, is that an issue? I mean, I'm an editorial writer. We care about that a lot. But I mean, do regular people who have regular jobs and real jobs, excuse me, excuse me to my bosses, care about, if there are committee reports and hearings and discussion, or do they care if it's all done and then they, ta-da, we're done?
I think that active citizens want to be able to get the ear of their elected officials and to have a sense that they're, that not only are they heard, but that they're voicing their opinions makes a difference. For many people, participating in politics is more than going out once every few years and casting a ballot in an election. And the government has to be not just open, but welcoming and responsive, or else the government gets the credibility of the government gets undermined.
Another question?
Hello, my name is Lauren Stock. I'm from Brooklyn College. My question to you would be, I understand that the governor has changed the way the state gives aid to the city, which is probably going to result in less aid being given. And I want to know what the story is behind that, and is it justifiable, and how is it going to change the lives of New York City residents?
You're in the hot seat on this one, Peter.
Well, we have changed the way that the city is getting money, but we're also pouring an enormous amount of money into the city. We're putting $7 billion into New York City schools, a huge amount of money, more than anybody has ever proposed, more than the courts ordered New York State to do, and we're putting it there because it needs to be there. We're investing in the city a host of other ways. There's going to be more building in the subway system under Governor Spitzer than there has been in many, many, many decades. So no one should think that New York City, with all of its vitality and with all of the things that make it great, is going to be shortchanged under this governor.
The Mayor Bloomberg didn't agree with the governor's or Peter's analysis of that, and he made that clear.
But who has ever said, "Oh, you've given me enough money"? Ever?
Well, Michael Bloomberg. I mean, that's something that
Well, one of the things that the mayor is unhappy about, I think the governor's done right. The closing of these corporate tax loopholes. I think the governor's much more correct than the mayor, who's raising, I think, red herrings on that. The mayor's upset about the revenue sharing. In general, it's certainly true that you're investing a huge amount of money because you're investing in a lot of different places. I guess my question, we're here, so we get to ask, this guy is really important. People should know this. So I'm like,
the governor is really important.
Well, that's true, but he, I will say, this was true when the governor was Attorney General. He had a reputation for really hiring talented people. And Pataki had a reputation for hiring incredibly lazy people.
Well, you're a supporter of the other side.
That's true, but extremely objective in my analysis. So that said, it's like, this first budget, something's going to get resolved here.
Let me ask everyone this. Spitzer said when he ran, I'm not going to increase taxes. And his opponent at the time, a guy named John Faso, said he is going to increase taxes because he wants to change the bottle bill. But Spitzer, I got you. But Spitzer, everyone, we can agree, has wanted to close these tax loopholes. Mm-hmm. That means someone's going to pay more taxes. Is that a tax increase? Why don't we start over here?
Yeah.
Okay. A short answer, Errol.
Well, it happens all the time. I mean, you'll hear, I'm not going to increase, there'll be no new taxes. Well, they'll raise the old ones. Or there'll be service fees.
Okay.
You'll have a long schedule of fees. So every time you go to a state park or some other kind of place, the bottle bill and so forth, there'll be, nickels and dimes flowing out of, 14 million citizens. So, I mean, but I think the importance of the pledge, I think we don't want to overstate it. I mean, he ran on it, but it's not going to be, if it changes, I don't think it'll be a political death sentence for him the way it was for Governor Florio in New Jersey 10 years ago.
Well, the real question is new taxes for whom, anyway?
Right, but he didn't say that. He just said...
I know.
That was the complaint.
I want to come to Dan. I mean, is that a tax increase?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, and then...
There's a difference between pumping up taxes and closing crazy loopholes. I mean, when you got something that says you can beat your taxes by opening up a paper corporation in another state, and you say you can't do that anymore, that's not raising a tax. That's closing a loophole.
But isn't
We're cutting
someone's going to pay that
taxes.
tax?
Yes, somebody's going to pay taxes that they should have paid if they hadn't figured out a slick way of getting around it. That's not a tax raise. That's closing a loophole.
Okay, so
and
either way,
I
it's
think
a
that
good thing.
everybody
I can
understands
count
that.
votes too. We got 3 yeses and 1 no.
Would you count the audience on this one, please?
We got another question from the floor.
Good evening. Juton Williams from Medgar Evers College. I haven't heard the word yet, steamroller, but this might be the greatest characterization of Governor Spitzer. And by his own admission, he is a steamroller. He's also been labeled a bully, a lecturer rather than a debater. My question is, while this approach may be good for policy, is the governor attempting political suicide, risking future greater political ambitions?
This goes to what we were talking before. Is his style, as this gentleman says, too aggressive, too pushy? His elbow's too sharp.
I mean, I don't know any first-term governor who didn't try to throw his weight around and to accomplish things during a honeymoon period when there was a mandate and so on. The question to be asked about any governor is whether or not he or she is going to maintain that energy over a 4-year term or into a second term. What we've seen are governors who start out strong and who the steam gets let out of them pretty quickly.
A steamroller without steam.
Well, that's exactly the point.
Yeah, I mean, it's classical political science. You read that in The Prince and Machiavelli, right? I mean, the prince is advised to do whatever unpleasantness you've got to do, you need to get it out of the way right away. In that context, Machiavelli's talking about killing your enemies. In this case, I think it's not quite as dramatic, but
Well,
but
use
it
a
is
steamroller.
important. Well, that's right, and to move things forward. I mean, you absolutely have to. I mean, the inertia in Albany is part of the problem.
Well, is there an intemperance in his?
I've known him a long time. I've had the pleasure of serving with him in the district attorney's office and then serving under him for 8 years at the attorney general's office. And I can tell you one thing, sir, and that is that he says what he thinks is right, and he's not going to be afraid if other people don't like it. People thought for 8 years that he was going to change his style as Attorney General, and he didn't, not for a single day. And New York State has seen how it is. He's addressing the problems in the state right now, and I think that it would be an unwise bet to bet against the fact that he is going to stop saying what he thinks is right.
You want to get in? We got another question after you.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a style that plays pretty well. It played well as Attorney General. People like a fighting governor. I will say that Governor Spitzer goes on and on about Teddy Roosevelt. Oh, this is here. Our view, there was another Roosevelt who was a governor in New York. We like a little more Franklin, maybe a little less Teddy.
I think we have another question here.
Hi, I'm Bella Hanukaeva from Brooklyn College, and I have a question for, I think for everybody.
Jump ball.
For everybody, everybody can answer it. So I have a question, it's like a general question about public assistance. Should we expect any changes?
Well, let's ask Mr. Policy here. Mr. Pope.
One of the things that you should expect from us is that we're going to continue to try to figure out how to do things better. Let me give you an example of vocational retraining. During the transition, we heard from a SUNY professor who had done a study of vocational retraining money. He found that there was something on the order of $1.3 billion in monies scattered across a good dozen programs. None of it was coordinated. None of it was coordinated with what local businesses upstate needed. So people were being trained for jobs that didn't exist. Well, we're going to change that. We're going to try to get together all of those programs, put them under one roof, figure out how it is that we can train people for jobs that do exist. And one of the things that we're going to start with is by asking employers, what kind of job force do you need, so we can then train to that. So yeah, you will see differences. We're going to make sure that there is a very strong safety net, and we're going to make sure that we're not doing things just because we did it that way last year. We're going to try and do it because it works.
Which reminds me, Errol, when Spitzer ran, he said he wanted to address the property taxes in the suburbs, which he's trying to do in his budget, and school funding in New York City. And the last one was jobs upstate. How much, I mean, talking about Franklin Roosevelt, how much can a government do to create jobs in a place like Buffalo or other parts of upstate, which they're running out of opportunity?
If you look at the dead zones of the upstate economy, the government is providing the jobs right now. So the government's in the business of job creation, whether it wants to be or not. You go to town after town, and it's the state-funded hospital, or whether it's Medicaid money or actually a public hospital is not that important. It's state dollars. You've got the SUNY campuses that are major employment centers all across the upstate region. So when you try to figure out what the government should be doing differently.
Prisons with those phone calls.
Well, yeah, prisons are horrible when it comes to job creation, by the way. I mean, it's mostly guards. A lot of it gets contracted out for the food services and so forth and the materials, but the guards jobs are awful, and so the government is deeply invested anyhow. The only question is to try and figure out how to, for example, decommission a prison and take some of the resources that were going into that facility and maybe the facility itself and convert it the way you would convert a brownfield, an environmental site, and turn it into something that's productive. I mean, but that involves an entire change of mindset. I mean, it was Mario Cuomo who built so many of those prisons. It was Governor Pataki who maintained them and indeed opened more. And now, if you want to try to sort of go in the other direction, in part because the prisoner count is falling, in part because the upstate economy is dying, and in part because the Medicaid spending is unsustainable, you've got to just change the entire mindset. And I think it's one of the most ambitious parts of the Spitzer program. I don't know if Peter would agree. And it's one on which they're going to be judged. It's
what, job creation?
Job creation upstate in particular.
Well, that's the third leg. I mean, how is he going to be able to do it? Can he do it? I mean, his hero FDR did it by printing money. I don't know if Eliot Spitzer could print money, but
not yet.
Not yet. Oh, it's an announcement. No, but what he's going to have to work on for the next year, and I'm guessing that he probably already is solving the healthcare crisis for real. Not just how we're spending, but figuring out some way to reduce the burden on employers, because like workers' comp, this definitely makes people uncompetitive, and it's just it's a killer. So that is something that Working Families Party is obviously very keen to help drive forward, and we won't be the only ones. I think you can look to next year should be universal health care year in New York. We shall see.
Well, one of the things that the governor has said is, particularly with respect to upstate cities, is he looks at himself as the chief recruiting officer for New York State. What would it take if he were the mayor of an upstate city to attract a company into that city? And there are a whole host of answers, and you hit a number of them. The brownfields, you have to show employers that New York is open for business by doing things like the workers' comp reform. You need to do WICS reform. You do need to hold the line on taxes, because you look, for example, at our neighboring states, New Jersey and Connecticut, and they're giving tax breaks all the time to try and lure people out of our state. Well, we want to attract people into our state. We don't want people to make a choice to go to some other place in the United States. Come to Utica, come to Syracuse, come to Buffalo. We have lots of empty housing stock upstate, and of course you can't have an economy that's based on prisons. That's an economy that is fundamentally unsustainable. So he views himself as the recruiter in chief.
Can I throw something out? A reader sent this to me. When people retire, civil servants in New York, they're really walking away with hundreds of thousands of dollars, and they take it to Arizona or they take it to Florida. Is there any thought to maybe creating some incentive to have them stay in New York?
You mean their pensions?
Yeah, their pensions, their retirement, their
What
Gotta
an
increase
interesting
global
idea.
warming.
I was going to say, make the weather better upstate. Yeah.
That's a good one.
Well, he has a 4-year term, last I checked, and it's only been 3 months, so we'll see what the remaining months and years bring. I want to thank everyone for coming. It's been a lively hour. And any last words?
I look forward to reapportionment.
We'll come back for that battle for the midterm elections. Anything to look forward to the next few months?
More of the same. Progress, successes,
Fights?
fights.
I think to the extent that reform is still on the agenda in Albany, it's not going to just be the governor, but now it's time to start looking at the legislature. In particular, this annual farce of the member items that are never disclosed. Hundreds of millions of dollars being spent in a form of really incumbent protection. It's a form of just patronage being doled out with almost no disclosure whatsoever, even after the fact. That's got to change, and I think that'll go a long way towards really making Albany reform happen.
Housing, jobs, education. Those are the things the governor is going to be judged on. And we hope that this energy, and he's open to other ideas going forward here.
Now, this program will be airing in early April, but we're taping it a few days earlier, so there may be a state budget by the time people are seeing this, so we kind of skirted around that issue. But after the state budget comes is the rest of the year. And, other issues lie before the governor. We have another minute or so. You want to give us any...
Well, one of the truths about New York State is that it has a huge permanent government in the guise of its agencies. There's enormous potential in those agencies that does not need any input from the legislature on a day-to-day governing basis. One of the things that Errol started off with was with the stroke of a pen, we were able to fix the prison telephone issues. Well, we're going to be spending a lot of time figuring out what else that we can fix just because attention has not been paid to it for a long, long time.
Peter Pope, you were the special guest tonight, so you get the last word. I want to thank everyone for coming. My name is Michael Aronson with the Daily News, and hope you'll join us next time on CUNY Forum. Thank you.